Hi, this is Alice, and the first book I'm going to be talking about this evening is The Plot by Jean Haunt Corlitz. The Plot is a satirical novel about a great plot. A young literary fiction author named Jacob Finch Bonner publishes his first book and is an overnight success. The novel isn't a bestseller, but gets excellent reviews in all the prestigious literary publications. Move ahead several years, though, and Jacob is now teaching literary writing at a third-rate program. After a couple lousy novels with bad reviews, he is no longer able to write at all. Then, in one of his workshops, an arrogant student comes to Jacob and says he has the perfect plot for a novel and it's a guaranteed bestseller. Jacob is skeptical until he hears the plot. It's brilliant. Jacob doesn't think the kid will be able to write the book, and Jacob knows it would be totally unethical to steal the plot and publish it himself. He wouldn't do a thing like that, would he? The Plot is a rare find. It's beautifully written and a lot of fun to read. I love this book.
All right, my first book is an adult nonfiction. It is Made in China by Amelia Pang. And this tells a story of Julie Keith, who was who purchased a set of graveyard decorations for Halloween. And in it was a note from Sun Yi, who was a political prisoner assigned to work in a labor camp manufacturing cheap goods all throughout the world. And so through this letter, this led to an investigation into what are called re-education through labor camps. And so these are a way that manufacturers can exploit labor camps and and have those goods come onto the free market. And this book does a really good job of having the consumer reflect on their consumer habits and the real cost of having cheap goods within the marketplace. And the end of it is really good because it describes the questions that consumers ought to be asking of companies, like where their labor practices and transparency and stuff like that. So I would highly recommend this to anyone looking for a searing nonfiction book.
You gonna change the slide?
I did, didn't I?
No, it says time still.
Oh, on my screen it has Tara up. Hold on.
Oh. Oh,
I could keep going.
there we go. Now it's there.
Well, we good now?
The Guest List by Lucy Foley is a mystery thriller akin to the classic Agatha Christie murder novels. It's told in multiple viewpoints, and each of the characters has a secret. It's about rising TV star Will and his bride Jules, who is a magazine publisher, and they're getting married on a remote island off the Irish coast, which is a perfect place for a murder to happen, of course. The story takes place on two different timelines. We have the day before the wedding, where we get to know the characters, hear their backstories, and find out how they're all interconnected to one another. And then we have the night of the luxurious, glamorous wedding of the year, when the champagne is flowing and the tensions are building. Giant rainstorm comes in and knocks the power out, so of course someone is killed. When the lights come back up, the body's discovered and everyone's secrets start to unravel. They're trying to figure out who did it, but it turns out everyone has a motive. I liked this book because it's fast-paced. It'll keep you turning pages late into the night, and it has a lot of twists that will keep you guessing.
Wings of Ebony by J.L. After witnessing her mother's murder, Rue's life changes forever. Her father, who she has never met, comes to take her away from the only home she knows to a rough area in Houston to Gaizan, a magical island. She finds out she comes from a line of powerful people. She breaks the rules by going back to Houston and give her sister a birthday gift. Shady things happen and she has to use magic to save her sister's life, putting her own life in danger. Her magic is stripped and she is hunted. While on the run, she learns the truth about her heritage, the wicked conspiracies between Gaizan, and the crime and violence attempting to destroy her home in Houston. Rue has to trust someone she's hated her whole life. She is betrayed by someone she thought was on her side. And most of all, she has to accept her own story, her ancestors' story, and walk in a power that she never knew she had. I'm a fan of fantasy books and books where people learn who they are. So this was a good book for me. I enjoyed it.
This is The Inheritance Games, and this is a teen book, but definitely adults would enjoy it as well. It's about a girl named Avery, and Avery is just trying to survive her crummy life when she is called by a mysterious person who tells her that they have something to give her. She travels to the mansion of Tobias Hawthorne, who has just died, and is told that mostly everything he had is now hers. Avery has no idea who this man was or what her connection was. And as you can imagine, Tobias's family is in an uproar when a stranger inherits his fortune and not them. To receive her inheritance, Avery must move into the Hawthorne mansion, where every room is full of puzzles, riddles, and codes. It's up to Avery to figure out this puzzle of why she received the inheritance before one of the Hawthorne family members tries to get rid of her. This book kept me reading the whole time. It's definitely going to be a series. I could not put it down, and I'm really excited for the second one. So that is The Inheritance Games.
Nice if I unmute, huh? My next book is The Perfect Daughter by D.J. Palmer. I have been a fan of books featuring multiple personality disorder, called MPD, ever since two books were published many years ago, All About Eve and Sybil. Though you may remember those were both turned into movies. Well, the novel The Perfect Daughter is the best book I've read in recent years using MPD to drive the plot. The chapters are told from multiple points of view, which moves the story forward quickly and provides great twists. Penny, a young girl who was adopted at age 4, appears to have committed murder at age 17. She is found covered in the victim's blood at the murder scene. Did she do it? Did one of her alternate personalities commit the crime? Is she faking MPD? And has she been dissembling for years? It's absolutely gripping, and I highly recommend it.
All right, this is the first of my fiction books. It is The Murmur of Bees by Sofia Segovia. And this is the first book that has been translated into English. It was originally published in 2015. And one of the themes that it highlights is the Spanish flu epidemic, which is extremely clairvoyant considering it was originally published in 2015. But it tells the story of the Morales family in northern Mexico during the Mexican Revolution and the, like I said, the Spanish flu epidemic. And it focuses on a baby whom they rescue who has the power to, who has the ability to see into the future, and he helps protect the Morales family through 2 generations, which it really highlights. And this is a really wonderful, well-written story. The descriptions alone are absolutely gorgeous, and I would highly recommend to put this on the to-read list.
Parable of the Sower by Octavia E. Butler is a sci-fi dystopian novel, and it's also a classic as it was published in '93, but it's set in the year 2025, so it's eerie to see all the things that she wrote about that are happening today. The story is about 15-year-old Lauren, who lives in a walled community outside of LA with her family. There's a lot of water shortages, jobs are scarce, climate change has wreaked havoc on the planet, And there's also a lot of wealth disparity. So while Lauren and her family are by no means well off, they're certainly doing a lot better than people that live outside of the walls, who unfortunately are having to fight and kill each other for finite resources. However, it's a group of such of these outsiders that attack Lauren's neighborhood one day. They burn down the houses, everyone gets separated, and Lauren doesn't know whether her family is alive or dead or where they are. So her only choice is to flee. So she packs one of her father's guns and a backpack full of supplies and heads out on the road by herself. Luckily, she's able to join forces with another group of refugees, and together they head north across this dystopian wasteland in hopes of finding a safer place where they can start their lives anew. What I liked about this book is that it had a lot of similarities to things happening today, which was a little eerie, but also it's a reflection on humanity itself and a warning about what could possibly happen if we're not careful.
You're still on the time slide, Chuck.
I changed it. Hold on.
Now it's better. It must just get stuck.
All right, my next book is Dear Justice. This is the sequel to Dear Martin. So rough childhood lands Quan in a situation where he's pulling a gun at a gang leader's house party, ending in the shooting death of a police officer. We first meet Quan and Dear Martin when Justice, the main character, visits him in jail. In this book, they begin writing each other. Quan remembers that they met when they were little kids and wonders how they ended up in completely different places. Justice on a good track and in college, and him in and out of jail for most of his life, and this last time in jail for 2 years with no court date on the books. With the help and support from Justice, a tutor, and an intern, he begins to find a little bit of hope. Of course, he isn't going to name names, but he admits that 3 other people pulled a gun at the same time at that house party. The police mishandled the case from the beginning, and he is coerced into a confession. If you need a story where the right kind of help is given at the right time and second chances do exist, this is the book for you.
This is To Tell You the Truth, and it's an adult mystery thriller, my favorite thing to read. Lucy has achieved her dreams of fame and fortune through becoming a best-selling author. But Lucy has been hiding things for years, even from her husband, Dan. When Lucy was a child, her brother went missing, and Lucy was with her brother at the time, but she wouldn't tell anyone what happened to her brother and still hasn't. Now Lucy's husband has gone missing as well, and her past is being dug up. Lucy goes on a hunt to figure out what happened to Dan before the blame is put on her. Could Lucy have hurt Dan? Did she hurt her little brother? You'll have to read it to find out, but it's going to take a lot of digging inside of herself for her to finally tell the truth.
This is Alice, and the book I'm going to talk about next.
You're muted, Alice.
Hi, don't click unmute twice, or you again. I knew you wanted that technical knowledge. The book I'm going to talk about next is called The Phone Booth at the Edge of the World. This is based on a true story. This phone booth really exists. The novelization. Oh, you know what?
I think your mouse is on over the button now.
I'm hitting a, anyway, I beg your pardon. It's really annoying. So anyway, The Phone Booth at the Edge of the World is based on a true story. This phone booth really exists. In a huge Japanese tsunami on March 11th, 2011, Yui lost both her mother and her daughter as she watched. Grief takes hold of her life. Each day is a struggle. One day on a radio show, she hears about a man in the town of Atsuchi who has placed a telephone booth at the bottom of his garden. It's a beautiful glass windowed booth painted white with a rotary dial telephone on a small table. People come from miles around to speak to their loved ones. It doesn't matter that the phone isn't connected. They believe their voices are being sent on the wind to those they have lost. Yui goes to Atsuchi, but finds she is unable to speak on the wind phone. She does, however, meet Takishi, a man who lost his wife, and they become friends, bound together in their grief. This is a beautiful, moving story about how to move on while honoring those who are no longer here.
This is the graphic novel that I've selected. It is Hot Comb by Ebony Flowers. This is a series of vignettes that illustrate Black women's experience with their hair. And this really encapsulates one of the reasons why I really love graphic novels. It's not just superheroes, it's not just fighting crime. It is telling extremely honest and poignant stories in a medium that you may not be able to with a fiction book. And Flowers has won a slew of awards for this, for her debut work, including her, the piece Hot Comb and the self-titled Hot Comb, which won the 2020 Eisner Award. She has also won the 2020 YALSA ALA Great Graphic Novel for Teens with this, as well as the 2020 Ignatz Award for Outstanding Graphic Novel. And possibly one of my favorite parts is that she currently resides in Denver, Colorado. So although she is from Baltimore, she is a local author.
Magic Lessons by Alice Hoffman is the sequel to Practical Magic, which you may remember was a movie with Sandra Bullock and Nicole Kidman. The author will actually be visiting us on May 6th, so keep an eye out for that event. The story is about the Owens family matriarch Maria, who lived during the Salem witch trials. And it begins when she's abandoned in a field as a baby and is raised by a healer woman who teaches her what she calls the nameless arts, or what people back then would have considered witchcraft. So healing people's heartbreaks, illnesses, etc., with tea and herbs and balms. When Maria is a teenager, she falls in love and gets pregnant, but he ends up abandoning her, so she follows him to Salem, Massachusetts, where he's from, which in hindsight for someone that practices witchcraft was probably not a wise move. This story is about Maria's love that ends up turning to obsession and leads her to using her power to create the curse that ends up haunting her family for the next several generations. But ultimately, this story is about learning about the power of love. For example, Maria has a really strong bond with her daughter, her neighbors and friends, and another man she meets later in life who teaches her the meaning of true love. So in the end, the ultimate magic lesson of all that Maria learns is that magic is the most powerful force on earth. Sorry, love is the most powerful force on earth.
Okay, this is one of my favorite books that I read in 2020, and I think I read it in one whole day, like maybe took bathroom breaks. So I really enjoyed this one. This is My America's debut novel for Kim Johnson. Tracy's a high school girl who's determined to save her father from death row. She is down to a little over 200 days left. He is down to a little over 200 days left to live, and she's running out of time to prove his innocence. She's seeking help from the Innocence Project and writes them a letter every week without fail. She hijacks her brother's Track Spotlight TV interview to try to get help for her father as well, embarrassing her brother in the process. Her school paper rival challenges her to help her write a huge story, but she turns up dead and her brother is the main suspect. He goes into hiding, and now Tracy has to prove her brother isn't a thug, her father isn't a murderer, and she isn't a selfish brat determined to get her way at any cost. In a town with secrets that someone is willing to kill to keep them all hidden.
This is Thirsty Mermaids, and it's an adult graphic novel, a little bit LGBTQ themed. I don't normally read adult graphic novels, but this author wrote a kid's graphic novel called Snapdragon, so I was really excited to see this one. It's about two mermaids and a sea witch, and they get drunk one night and decide it would be fun to turn into humans for the night. They manage to complete the spell and spend their night drinking at a local bar. It all seems like fun and games until the next morning when they find themselves hungover, they slept in an alley, and they don't know how to reverse the spell to be mermaids again. Until they figure it out, they're forced to crash at a new friend's place and get a job, which they don't quite understand what that means either. This is full of laughs and they have many obstacles to overcome. These mermaids figure out that being a human is not all it's cracked up to be.
Hi, my next book is a mystery, Who is Maude Dixon by Alexandra Andrews. Florence Darrow is a small town girl who believes she's destined to become a celebrated writer. Unfortunately, she is in her mid-20s and hasn't earned anything from her writing. She's excited when she lands a job as the assistant to a best-selling author, writing under the name Maude Dixon. The author's true name is Helen Wilcox. She's an arrogant, cold, and prickly woman. But no matter how Helen acts, Florence is fascinated. She's over the moon with excitement when Helen invites her to go along on a research trip to Morocco. But the longer they stay in Morocco, the more unsure Florence becomes about her relationship with the author. Then there's a horrible car accident. Florence wakes up in the hospital and is being called Helen. What happened to the real Helen? Should Florence say she's Helen and have a chance for success? Read it and find out.
My next book is going to be an adult fiction book. It is Perestroika in Paris. It is written by Jane Smiley. And I will say this, it's probably the most whimsical book that I read of the past few months. And it's just a really wonderful story, especially in the times that we're in. So it portrays Paris, who is the curious filly who escapes one night out of her pen, and she encounters Frida, who is a street smart stray, Raoul, a snobbish raven, and eventually Etienne, who is a young boy living with his great grandmother, ensconced in an old manor. And this is one of my favorite books just because it does a really good job anthropomorphizing animals, but not in a way that feels like a fantasy. I know for me personally, I'm not super into fantasy, so this was a really, really good portrayal of that. And as I've said before, this is something that I feel like Wes Anderson should definitely get his hands on and start writing the screenplay.
The Year of the Witching is fantasy, but it's set in the historical-esque town of Bethel, which is a puritanical society that's ruled over by a man known as the Prophet. The main character is Emmanuelle, and unfortunately her family has kind of fallen into disgrace. Her mother had her out of wedlock with an outsider from the village, which is a no-no according to the Prophet. So Emmanuelle spends her days trying to be as submissive and devoted as possible to her religion and not bring any more attention to her family. However, one day the family goat escapes their property and she chases him into the woods, which is a no-no for the villagers. They're not allowed to go there. And while there, she encounters the spirits of 4 witches that the first prophet actually murdered several generations ago. The witches give her her mom's diary, which is chock full of secrets and the history of the town, and full of things that the prophets did that were, quite frankly, just evil. And so Emmanuelle decides to go against everything she was raised to believe in order to save her friends and family from the fate that happened to her mother. What I liked about this book is it's a feminist tale about fighting to change a system that was built to keep you down.
Okay, I lied about all of my books being YA. This one is probably a little younger, but there's some parts in it that only adults will get. Tristan Strong Destroys the World is the sequel to Tristan Strong Punches a Hole in the Sky. If you're a fan of The Lightning Thief or Magnus Chase, if you like any of those books, are books based on mythology, this will be a book that you enjoy. Based on African and African American mythology, After becoming a hero in the first book, Tristan strong punches a hole in the sky. Things change. He gains more confidence and doesn't run from his emotions like in the first book. But in this book, his grandmother is abducted by evil seeking revenge. And to save her, he must return to Alki, a land where fables and story characters come to life. He thought he would get a hero's welcome, but that doesn't happen. Alki is a mess. He teams up with his old crew, Gumbaby, Ayana, and the new guy, Junior, for this adventure, and they have to deal with surly gods, a super unhelpful Anansi, culture vultures, and super evil villains, all while his hero, John Henry, is slowly dying. Hard decisions have to be made, snarky teens having conversation, and hilarious dialogue throughout the whole thing. This is a super fun story.
This is The Hating Game, and this is an adult romance. I don't normally read romances, but this one came highly recommended, and it's worth it. It's a slow burn. Lucy and Josh hate each other, and I don't mean that they secretly hate each other. They outright hate each other. They go out of their way to be mean and do things that they know will annoy one another. They're each assistants to the CEOs of their publishing company, and so they have to work side by side every day. A new position is opening up at their company, and it will be certainly Lucy or Josh. One of them will get that job. But when this happens, when this position opens up, their hating game gets taken to a whole new level. The tension reaches a boiling point, and this causes Lucy and Josh to think about if they really hate each other. Do they feel differently, or is this just another game? I really liked this one. It is a little bit predictable, as romances are, but definitely really good. So that was The Hating Game.
I also have a romance. It's actually more women's fiction in that there's a lot of focus on the relationship between the main character and her antagonist. There is a romance. I thought the whole thing was fun. This is, if you want something pretty fluffy and amusing, this is the book to go to. It's called The Secret Bridesmaid by Katie Birchall. Sophie Breeze has the perfect job, and she created it all by herself. She is a professional bridesmaid. She poses as a friend of the bride, but is actually hired to create the perfect wedding. She'll do anything, get anything a bride desires. Some of the funniest bits in the book are emails she exchanges with brides and vendors. There's crazy demands and goofy misunderstandings. And Sophie is doing well in her business, but she could use a bit more publicity. Then she's hired for the Society Wedding of the Year by Lady Victoria Swan. Sophie is thrilled until she learns that it is the bride's mother who hired her, not Lady Victoria. The bride is an over-the-top diva whose goal is to make Sophie quit. So can Sophie hang in there and create a successful wedding for 450 guests and also capture the heart of Lady Victoria's handsome brother? This book is clever and fun, and it's a perfect combination of chick lit, women's fiction, and romance.
All right, my last fiction book, which is an adult fiction book, is Winter Counts by David Heska Wambley Waden, and I do hope I am pronouncing that correctly. This tells Virgil Wounded Horse, who is half white, half native, and he is a local enforcer on the Rosebud Indian Reservation in South Dakota. So he will step in where justice has failed and enforce his own brand of justice. This does a fantastic job of rewriting the Western novel from a Native perspective. And Virgil Wounded Horse is taking care of his nephew when he is snared into a case of heroin being brought onto the reservation, and tying that down to the cartel and gangs in Denver. And like I said, so this really gives the reader a really good avenue to reflect on bigger questions about race, identity, violence on the American landscape, and then also how to come to terms with that. Wyden is a citizen of the Lakota Nation, and he also lives in Colorado, where he teaches the MFA program at Western Colorado University.
The Push by Ashley Audrain is a psychological thriller. It's a character-driven novel about a woman who is ambivalent about motherhood, but feels pressured into it by her husband and society. So when Blythe finally gives birth to her daughter, Violet, she can't seem to connect to the baby. And as the child begins to get older, she starts noticing little things about her behaviors that leads her to believe that there's something psychologically wrong with Violet. She tells her husband her concerns, who of course doesn't believe her, and neither does anyone else close to her, which leaves Blythe questioning her own sanity and her own mothering skills. Could it be that she's a bad mother after all? Of course, this is proved wrong when her second child is born, a son named Sam, who she feels an immediate connection with and that love that she was craving the first time around. Sam brings a peaceful balance to their family that wasn't there before. But unfortunately, one day, there's a horrific accident, which changes everything. Blythe believes that the accident was Violet's fault. This brings about the end of her marriage and leaves Blythe dealing with a lot of trauma and PTSD in the aftermath of this accident. This story was riveting. It's in the vein of We Need to Talk About Kevin, and it's about how society gaslights women. For example, as the reader, you don't know if you can trust Blythe until the very end.
All right, so this guy right here, this book blew my mind. So Cinderella, the story of Cinderella is basically screwed over all the females in this universe for 200 years. They are taught that if a girl is meek, selfless, and serving, and good things will happen to her. So young ladies are required by law to attend the king's ball. There they are chosen and wed and tasked to build a life with their husbands. But this isn't always a good thing. Some of the men are abusive and even murderous. Sophia is not like the other girls in the kingdom. She questions everything and is in love with another girl and would rather run away than to live a lie. At the ball, she meets a descendant of Cinderella's stepsister and learns the truth about Cinderella's story, Cinderella's real story, not the story rewritten to keep power-hungry men in control. So if you like rewritten fairy tales and stories that empower women and let them rescue themselves, this is the book for you.
That sounds really good, Shamika. I'm trying to put it on hold right now. This one is Before She Was Found, and this is another adult mystery thriller. It's about 12-year-old Cora Landry. Her and her friends, Violet and Jordan, are supposed to be having an ordinary sleepover, except for they're not. They decide to sneak out to go to the abandoned railroad yard on the outskirts of town to chase a town myth. But later that night, Cora is discovered laying near the railroad tracks, bloody and barely alive, and her friends aren't anywhere to be found at first. Cora and her friends start blaming her injuries on the town myth, which is a man who is said to have killed his family and many girls after a heartbreak. But this man would have been dead years ago, so it doesn't make sense that Cora and her friends think it was him. Soon, everyone in this book is a suspect, and you can't trust anyone. This book is told in different points of view, including those of Cora and her friends, their parents, doctors, and more. That was Before She Was Found.
And those are all of our books for this evening. Thank you all for joining us.